The Department of Homeland Security this week sent another letter again demanding access to Shelby Park. Texas is not evacuating, as you know, instead deploying even more razor wire. Do you think this will ultimately lead to a showdown between the federal border patrol agents and the National Guard in Texas?
Listen, I'm proud of the great state of Texas. I'm proud of our governor. I'm proud of our state legislature because they're stepping up and defending our state from invasion. Listen, the mayor of a bunch of blue cities, the governors of a bunch of blue states have declared illegal immigration emergencies in their states. That's true in New York. That's true in Boston. That's true in Massachusetts. That's true in Chicago. That's true in L.A. Eric Adams, the liberal Democrat in New York, has said illegal immigration is destroying New York City. That's 110,000 people are destroying New York City. I agree with him. But if 110,000 people are destroying New York City, what the hell do you think 9.6 million people are doing to Texas and the other states on the southern border? And so Texas is stepping up to defend our state. I'm glad we are. But the reason Texas is doing so is because Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and the Democrats affirmatively want this invasion. By the way, you want to know why negotiating with these guys, why they're doing it in such bad faith? They are today, as you pointed out. Joe Biden is litigating against the state of Texas to try to stop Texas from securing the border. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. is the greatest friend the Mexican drug cartels have ever had. He is the greatest financial benefactor the Mexican drug cartels have ever had. He is the single largest human trafficker in history. Now, that may sound like hyperbole, but those 9.6 million people, when they come over and turn themselves in, they tell the Border Patrol agents, I want to go to the following city, and they pick a city. And Joe Biden puts them on planes and puts them on buses and sends them to every city in America, and Joe Biden is the last mile of the human trafficking network. So, yes, Biden is fighting ferociously to stop Texas from defending ourselves. He is wrong. But it shows that Biden wants this, and the only thing Biden wants next is to make Ron Johnson have to buy a bigger poster board because the chart goes higher. That's all he's looking for.
Can you explain, when you say Democrats want this, Biden wants this, they're doing this intentionally, can you say more about that? Because I'm sure you're familiar with, the Great Replacement theory and how that's been used to justify mass shootings in Buffalo and El Paso, and I would think you're trying to differentiate your position from that, but if you could...
Well, just look at the facts. 70,000 people died of fentanyl. They don't care. So they must be okay with it. They don't care about the human trafficking. They don't care about the terrorists. We had 260-some terrorists last year that were caught. We actually don't even know where they are. We did a classified briefing the other day. They couldn't tell us where these terrorists are. We got more crime coming across all the time. So if you know these things are happening and you're not willing to stop it, then you must be wanting it. I don't know why. They want all these people to come here, and there's wonderful people who want to come here legally.
Can you characterize for a minute, there was some criticism, pretty strong criticism against the Republican leadership. I understand concern about Ukraine from your perspective here, but the idea that Senator Langford has been at the table here. Senator Tillis said earlier this morning, he said, if you think that Senator James Langford from Oklahoma is going to sell Republicans down the river on an issue like this, going to rock the ruby red state like that. I mean, what do you say about that? Is Senator Langford not...
I think Senator Langford is doing the best he can, but he was told by McConnell that you cannot put anything in there that says that we will not provide Ukraine aid if the border doesn't get secure. Now, we've talked about it. A bunch of us, we talked about it at a conference. We said, we want something that Biden has to do because we know he's lawless. So the only thing we could come up with is let's release monthly Ukraine aid if the numbers of people come across the border and go down. Leader McConnell said, no way. All right, so James Langford might be trying to do all he can, but when the leadership is telling him you can't do that.
But address this from the policy side. You're tying that to Ukraine, I understand that. But the idea that there's been all this criticism about what's been negotiated behind closed doors here, that must fall on the shoulders of Langford.
My experience, well, first off, we don't know. I mean, we haven't seen the text. All we do is we read the things you guys write. We've gotten a few briefings. We don't know all the facts yet, but here's what we do know. Why don't they give it to us? We've been trained. Okay, go to the omnibuses, go to the China bill, go to all these bills. What they happen, they do it behind closed doors. They give it to us at the last minute and say, vote for it. Well, we don't really care if you vote for it because the Democrats are going to vote for it, and we'll just get 10 or 12 of Republicans to vote for it. So they've trained us. So if this is such a good bill, then why don't you give it to us? And as you negotiate it, we'll give you our thoughts.
Well, let me just quick, because internally, by the way, it was Hoeven's idea. John Hoeven had the idea, we ought to have some kind of benchmark that they have to meet if they're going to get, what they want. In this case was Ukraine funding. I thought that was a great idea. So literally had to be at least a half a dozen lunches, if not more. We pressed that point. I made the point that I would not only vote for, I would promote a bill to help the freedom-loving people of Ukraine if it actually secured the border. But this is what we need to do with the law of this administration. So there was a great deal of support in our conference for that position. But without consulting the conference at all, apparently Leader McConnell told Senator Langford, who's trying to do a good job, that that's not even on the table. And we've had that confirmed by apparently Senator Sinema said, well, James never asked for that. And that's just, it boggles our mind when the conference, there was a great deal of support for something that would give us leverage that would force President Biden to actually secure the border. That wasn't even part of the discussion. So, that's why I talk about, the lack of negotiating skills is profound from leadership. So now we've got this with so many holes, and this, again, a Rube Goldberg solution that's not a solution, because as many people have said, they caused this problem. Biden and Democrats in Congress are the root cause. They want an open border. It's a real problem for James Langford having to deal with that. And it's even more difficult when he's getting his marching orders in terms of the negotiation, not from the conference in terms of what the conference red lines are, but what the red line of one individual is who doesn't consult with the conference, just makes the decision for us.
Senator Lee, regarding your letter to President Biden regarding the strikes on Houthis in Yemen, doesn't the president have the authority under the War Powers Act? And as the Houthis are again designated terrorists, doesn't he have the authority under the 2001 authority for the use of military force?
First of all, it's not the topic of this conversation. I'll say just very briefly. I'll say very briefly, there are still questions that need to be answered. I want to know what his source of authority is. Maybe he'll rely on the 01. The 01 and 02 AUMFs have been used as the Swiss Army knife for every conflict out there. And I do think it's important for the president to specify which of those AUMFs are their source of their authority, if they're relying on their inherent authority under Article 2 to repel an attack against U.S. forces or something else. I do need to know that.
Senator, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Former President Trump, he won Iowa, he won New Hampshire. If he wins the general election, he'd be enforcing whatever deal passes the Senate here. With that in mind, should Senate Republican leadership be deferring to Trump on this question whether this deal is good enough to pass?
Well, if we're going to expect the next president, he'll be the next Republican president. If we expect him to be able to secure the border, he ought to be able to see this bill, and he ought to be able to and be engaged and say, is this going to help me secure the border or not? But what we know is he doesn't need it. He secured the border. So I absolutely should we ask him. But on top of that, why isn't the House leadership, on the Republican House leadership, in the middle of this? I mean, why wouldn't they? Why would we do anything that put them in a bad position?
Scott, can I get a clarification on your position, please, and the position of your fellow senators? Do you all oppose Ukraine aid under any circumstances, or would you be willing to consider it in context of a border bill that you support?
I have supported Ukraine aid, okay, but I got a lot of questions. We're going to have a conference meeting at 3:30 today, and hopefully we're going to get a lot of answers. What we're trying to do here is get answers so we can make an informed decision. I mean, I want the Ukrainians to win. I want Russia to lose, but we got $34 trillion of debt. We don't know where the $100 billion that we've already spent, where it all went, what's the plan? We don't know any of those things. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything.
So just to be clear, your conditions are irrespective of the border side. You want explanations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Regardless of what's in the immigration side.
Right.
Okay. Is that generally the consensus of those on stage?
Look, there are differing views on stage on Ukraine aid, and that's a debate we can have. I have voted for previous bills to provide Ukraine aid. I have also pointed out the war in Ukraine is utterly unnecessary. It was caused by Joe Biden's weakness. It was caused by Joe Biden waiving sanctions on Nord Stream 2. Before the war started, President Zelensky in Ukraine urged the Senate to pass my sanctions legislation to stop Russia from invading, and Joe Biden and 44 Democrats flipped their position, voted in favor of Russia, and 4 weeks later, Putin invaded Ukraine. So President Biden caused this war in Ukraine, and right now today, Biden is flowing roughly $100 billion to Iran that is providing drones that are being used to kill Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. So Joe Biden is funding both sides of the war in a way that is utterly incoherent. My view is that doesn't make any sense and it needs to change. But what we're talking about today is a different piece of this. Listen, the reason this bill is so lousy is because I actually disagree with Ron Johnson on one thing. He says Mitch McConnell's a terrible negotiator. I actually think Mitch knows exactly what he's doing. He's just negotiating for the same objectives that Chuck Schumer has. They both want a bill that funds Ukraine and is a blank check to Ukraine. And they want a bill that has a fig leaf that pretends to do border security but doesn't actually do border security. They're negotiating for the identical outcome. And Chuck Schumer's enemies in Congress are conservatives in the Senate and our House Republican leadership. And sadly, Mitch McConnell's enemies are conservatives in the Senate and House Republican leadership. You know, it's interesting, the shell game that's been played on the justifications for this bill. Initially, we were told this bill will force Biden finally to secure the border. Okay, that's an objective I'm on board with. Very quickly, the proponents of this bill abandoned that. Said, yeah, we admit, okay, this bill won't do anything to Biden. He'll continue to do exactly what he's doing now. But, they say, this is argument number 2, move the shell, move the shell. Argument number 2, they say, well, this will give Donald Trump the tools he needs to fix this problem next year. Well, let me point out Ron Johnson's very helpful chart. Without this stinking pile of crap bill, Donald Trump got the numbers down to here. Joe Biden deliberately took the numbers up to here. And the genius Republican negotiators say, let's drop the numbers to here. Double where they were under Obama. It's not that they're bad at negotiating. It's that they want this outcome, and this outcome is terrible for the American people.
I stand corrected.
Yes.
Senator Cruz, there are humanitarian problems all over the world. Are you concerned that new rules will give future presidents, even Republican presidents, fewer options to help allies in need?
There's no country on the face of the planet that is more generous. We allow roughly 1 million people a year to come legally. I am the son of an immigrant. Earlier we had an absurd question about the Great Replacement theory, which is really fun when reporters want to be totally dishonest editorialists and say anyone that wants to secure the border is a racist. Well, I'm the son of a Cuban immigrant, damn it. I believe in legal immigration. But there's a right way to do it. You wait in line. And the dishonest reporting that says anyone who is concerned about what's happening, about murderers and rapists coming into this country, about gang members coming into this country, about Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists coming into this country, about little children being forcibly raped. I invite every one of you, come to the border and look in the eyes of a child that's been raped, because I've done that repeatedly. I've brought my colleagues down there. And for reporters to dishonestly say, well, you're just afraid white people are going to be replaced by you Hispanics. Well, as a son of a Cuban immigrant, no, I'm not afraid of that. But I'm tired of our government allowing children to be brutalized.
I think we take one more question, and we got to go vote.
What's an acceptable timeline for this to go to the floor, and what are you prepared to do to enforce that timeline?
Mike, you
Well,
want
remember what happened the last time we had a major overhaul of immigration, or attempted overhaul, 2013, the Gang of Eight bill. We had that in the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction, for a markup. Most of our markups last an hour or 2, maybe 3 for a long one. This one lasted for a month, about 4 weeks. And even then, we had some lag time between the end of the Senate Judiciary Committee markup and the time that it reached the floor. So, I personally don't understand why we don't go through all the processes. It's my understanding that they don't want to. So I've said, if you've already decided that, at a bare minimum, common courtesy would suggest the bare minimum that we need is a commitment that we'll have 3 weeks to review the bill with the text in hand. Remember, all we have right now are a loose set of bullet points that we're told that we can't even really talk about because they're not finalized, and yet they talk about them for their purposes, and they convince the Wall Street Journal to publish an editorial saying that any Republican who opposes this thing is trying to score cheap political points at the expense of national security. So I find that kind of offensive, given that they're still sitting on the text. We ask, why can't we see it? And they say, well, it's in a lot of different places. It's not all in one document. That's fine. Most of us on this stage are accustomed to looking at a whole bunch of different pieces of documents. A few of us did that for a living for many years as lawyers. We can do that. No, still won't let us have it. So at a minimum, we ought to have access to the text so that we can read it, understand it, prepare amendments, vote on those amendments, and receive input from our constituents. Now, they've been negotiating this thing, I believe, since October. October, November, December, January. Assuming that we see it sometime in the month of February, we'll be up in the 4-month range. If they can have access to what they're doing for 4 months, 3 weeks is not too much to ask. I've been stunned by how often this happens here. A year before I ran for office, back in 2010, the Obamacare thing had just happened, the 2,700-page bill. You gotta pass it to find out what's in it. I thought surely that must be a once-in-a-century gaffe that somebody pulls that trick and people fall for it. I've been stunned by how often this happens. And when the law firm of Schumer, McConnell, Johnson, and Jeffries, as it's currently composed, puts something together and drops it on us at the last minute, we don't appreciate it. Here, it's not even the full law firm. It's just the law firm of Schumer, McConnell. That is uncollegial to a degree that I lack the capacity in the English language to describe. For them to suggest that we ought to be ready to take this thing, thank them, and then vote on it, I don't know, within a couple of days, 3 days at the most, that's what they seem to think is the norm. That norm is not acceptable. Mature adults in any professional context do not treat each other this way, and I demand that they not do so here.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, yeah, we'll hold 41. I'm asking my colleagues to hold 41. This bill cannot move if 41 of us say we're not going to take that.